Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Friday, December 12th, 2025. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. It is the month of giving. Please go to commentary.org/donate to, if you are of a mind to do so, provide us with an end-of-year tax-deductible gift to keep the lights on, to keep the candle burning, to keep us talking here every day and publishing our magazine and releasing content on our website that is illuminating, necessary, and important. Again, that's commentary.org/donate. With me today, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
And Washington Free Beacon editor Eliana Johnson. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, John.
So, I keep reading these pieces every day, basically from, the never Trumper wing that is now the anti-Trumper wing that is now the soft Democratic wing of the Democratic Party, about how the wheels are coming off the Trump administration. This is it. Everything is starting to go wrong. His numbers are bad. His numbers on the economy are bad. In Indiana, the state legislature rebuffed efforts to change their redistricting plans or something or other. And even despite threats that Trump would target them, and nobody likes anything in the economy, and the healthcare plans are all going awry, and everything is bad. And Peggy Noonan, who is a pretty interesting weather vane in this regard, in the Wall Street Journal this morning, has a piece saying Trump is losing the script. And I remember very well in 2005 when she wrote a piece saying that George W. Bush was losing the script, and she got it right. She said Bush had stopped listening to people and was getting very messianic and wasn't really focused on how to win, how to convince people, but was more focused on his own virtue. Anyway, all of this is Trump's going down. 2026 is coming hard upon him, and the Republicans are in disarray. But so my first impulse is to go, whenever anybody says stuff like this, and then it turns out like it's all nonsense and it's all like wish casting. But I'm not really sure it's wish casting anymore. And I think maybe we want to reduce the question of whether or not just Trump, but the right in general, which seems so ascendant and so energetic at the beginning of 2025, is losing the thread of what brought it what brought it back to power in the first place, and the kind of fights that it should be having. Because, of course, the drama of the 8 years before, the drama was Trump unexpectedly becoming president, being all over the map, having 2 impeachments, losing, having this fit about losing, January 6th, and then the drama of the next 4 years, which was not only COVID, but Democratic efforts to prevent Trump from getting back into the White House, failing him getting back into the White House. And now he's going to leave the White House January 20th, 2029. There's some sense in which this existential drama is kind of over. Like the Trump roller coaster isn't over because he'll still be president for 3.5 years. But where is Trump going to be at any given moment in the rest of our lives starts where we see an endpoint. And I think that cuts into his ability to control political events in the United States. Obviously, he can control events outside the United States in very interesting and unexpected ways, like what is going on with Venezuela, and of course what went on over the spring and summer in the Middle East, but not here.
So I've written some of that stuff, not from, certainly in my case at least, not wish casting. It's what I've observed is this, I think, a breakdown in the system, the administration, since from my perspective, the high point of his going to the Knesset after stopping the war in Gaza. I sort of feel like after that, this slow but pretty steady decline started to happen. What I do think, though, is that um, we do underestimate Trump's ability to pull a rabbit out of a hat at any moment. Not even ability, his penchant for doing so. And I think there's going to be many more sort of big, giant, dramatic, unexpected moves that will set the Trump drama back in motion, even domestically. And I don't know what they're going to be, but I think that's something he needs to do for himself. I don't mean I'm not advising it. I mean I think it's a sort of almost sort of compulsive approach, modus operandi for him.
I'm just thinking that the what he decided at the beginning of 2025, Eliana, was obviously that he was going to use executive action in a way that almost no one has ever done before. He was going to simply declare that he had the right to do X, Y, and Z, to sort of like initiate lawfare proceedings against his enemies, to pardon people at a rate that is just absolutely staggering. Ordinarily, pardons came out from a president at the tail end of his administration as he was walking out the door. Just yesterday, he pardoned this Arizona electoral official who literally, was convicted in a relatively probably friendly courtroom of having falsified votes and had a 7-year sentence. So she's like the 10th pardon of the week. So he's just doing whatever he wants to do, saying he's going to make a decision on or involve himself in the decision on the antitrust implications of the Warner Brothers Discovery, Netflix, Paramount, Skydance deal on the grounds that he wants CNN to be sold to somebody that he likes. No one's ever talked this way before, behaved this way before. That was his decision. Like, he made a conscious decision. He was going to break to China however he could, and in whatever way he could. And the thing is that he can break to China, but he's still going to be gone. So he can break to China. Like, the weird thing is he can build a ballroom. I mean, it would be a ridiculous thing for a Democrat to do if they came in 2029. So he can build the ballroom, but then when he leaves, somebody can take a wrecking ball to the ballroom.
I'm sort of doubtful that will happen. I think the Democrats will like having the ballroom there probably. But as it pertains, you started with, are the wheels coming off this administration? And there are several people out there saying that Democrats have won a series of special elections. They seem to have more control of events. Is that true or not? 2 points, I think. The first part of this, I think, is a sort of natural jockeying, because Trump is a lame duck in his second term, for who will control the party afterwards. And we see this, it's a combination of Trump being a lame duck and I think of Charlie Kirk's death, this jockeying for control of the movement between various forces in, on the one hand, the political realm, and on the other hand, the podcasting, influencer, social media sphere. So it's a mixture of events. And number two, I think for Trump and the Republicans more broadly, and our friend Kristen Soltis Anderson makes this point in a piece today in the New York Times, that in the first term, Trump was Trump, but overall, his approval rating was quite high on the economy. The economy was good, and it was always a bright spot for him. And that's not the case in this second term. Voters are their top concerns are the economy and taxes, and the economy does not remain a bright spot for him. And that, I think, amid all the noise and the drama, is what does threaten to drag down the party ahead of 2026 and then 2028.
So obviously the proof of the pudding is in the eating. He is alternately saying that the economy is in the best shape ever, and then saying that he's going to fix the economy. He loves tariffs, but he's going to give farmers money to defray the effect of the disastrous effect of the tariffs on the American agricultural economy and all of that. That's where I think the idea that he's losing the thread starts coming clean. Like he's always in motion, and so you get the look, hey, squirrel problem. But in the end, there is the question of how the voters feel about the country at any given moment, and that's what they bring into the ballot box in these special elections, and when they will go to the ballot box in November of 26. And it's very unclear to me how his effort to constantly change the subject will lead people to think, oh my God, he's got a stable foundation here, we're on the way up, let's make sure he has all the tools that he can use to help us before he leaves power. I think it's just as easy to see not only the people who hate him, but the people who don't hate him but aren't necessarily like MAGA enthusiasts going, he really needs more runway. Like, I don't know what that's I think where the question comes in.
I think we should add one other thing to the mix, John, and that's the expiration of these Affordable Care Act subsidies. And this is to the not to Trump's problems, but to the GOP's general problem. Look, it's ridiculous that Republicans should be saddled with the Affordable Care Act and its problems, but life's not fair. So the fact of the matter is that the Biden administration increased subsidies for the Affordable Care Act during COVID. Those subsidies are now expiring at the end of the year, and premiums, healthcare premiums, will go up for 20 plus million people if action isn't taken. And healthcare is it's not our issue. It's not the issue that we excel on. And so Republicans in Congress right now are bickering amongst themselves and arguing over, 7 plans in the Senate and 7 plans in the House. And this is just not terra firma. It hasn't historically been terra firma for the GOP. So I think you can add that to the mix. And then the fourth thing I would add is that it's hard. The issues that Trump campaigned on really effectively were, look at all this trans insanity. I mean, his best ad was she's for they, them, I'm for you. And a lot of the insanity taking place on the college campuses. And so I think he's in a challenging position of having actually done a lot to address these issues.
Yeah,
right.
And then it's, okay, where do you go from here? And I think it would be useful for Republicans to remind people actually what life was like. And we're not actually hearing a lot about that, but it is hard when you've come in and to your point, John, he's used executive action and he's done that quite effectively. He's been vindicated by the courts in a lot of his use of this to cow university leaders. Okay, the ones he hasn't gone after are afraid he will go after them. And they're behaving much more sane. Now that's relatively speaking, but campuses aren't doing as insane things as they were doing. And the trans stuff has taken a back seat. And those were pretty effective campaign issues and campaign messages for the president in 2024. Aside from having a senile president and then a total non-entity in Kamala Harris on the ticket.
Yeah, I think Eliana's right in that, when Trump first got into office and he signed this flurry of executive orders, there was a sense of suspense because we didn't know sort of where they were going to land, how it was going to be implemented, what was going to work, what the courts were going to shoot down, and then a lot of it really did come to pass and was put into action. But I think also Eliana's point about the jockeying on the right, because MAGA is a sort of ideas vacuum, or in practice has been a sort of contradictory set of actions. He's left this vacuum has to be sort of filled, and that's the jockeying, and that's the competing ideas and the opposing camps on the right, and that looks from the outside like disarray, because it is, and that
Right.
itself projects a kind of weakness on the right.
Well, you said he's had a lot of vindication in the courts, and he's also had not a lot of vindication in the courts. I mean, he's made 3 goes at indicting or making sure that Letitia James, his enemy, the Attorney General of New York, who brought the ludicrous case of the legitimate checks that he was using to pay off Stormy Daniels, even if you think that was unseemly and gross, which it was, that those were, felonious transactions or, toward transactions, whatever. And he can't get an indictment. Like, the grand juries will not indict her. The Comey case was thrown out, and all that. So that stuff hasn't worked for him in certain types of courtrooms. He just lost, again, with a very left-wing judge, but he just, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland man, has been ordered freed by a judge, and that's not going to happen immediately, but it's not as though he has scored the kinds of successes I expected he would score in courts based on the primacy of the executive branch in the enforcement and interpretation of immigration law based on the 1952 National Security Act. I assumed that basically courts would say, well, there's really nothing we can do. Yeah, you can deport Mahmoud Khalil, and you can deal with Kilmar Abrego Garcia as you wish. and he's lost those. Now, again, maybe in the end he won't. Maybe in the end it'll be another 10 things that get elevated to the Supreme Court that will be ruled in his favor justifiably. Of course, the biggest 2 cases that are before the court, one we've heard, one we haven't heard, one we heard this week, which is the question of whether or not the president has the right to fire the heads of quasi-independent agencies, which will probably go his way, and then the tariffs and whether or not he has the power to impose these tariffs independently, which it's very hard to see going his way. And then the third, which is birthright citizenship, which, again, it would be an oceanic event were the Supreme Court to announce that birthright citizenship no longer attained as we understand it, and as we have understood it in this country for 140 some odd years. So I don't know where any of that is going. He's had a very mixed record on this, a more mixed record, as I say, than I would have expected. But he also has some pretty lousy lawyers that he's put in place all over the place, trying to make these cases in courtrooms, because he's getting, loyalists, because very experienced prosecutors and stuff don't want to do what he wants them to do because they know they're going to lose, or they know that the cases are lousy. So I don't know, like, it's there's a personnel issue. I was just thinking, like, what was the big story for 3 months in the United States? Things keep moving and moving and moving. Doge was the big story in the United States. Does anybody remember Doge? What did Doge do? We don't even know what Doge did. Did nothing. Now Elon Musk is off, going to make $1 trillion because of his latest contract with.
Well, he says he regrets it. It wasn't worth the drama. He said he regrets Doge. Too much drama. John, I should add, but also, Trump has solved the immigration problem, and
right,
he came in and solved it. There's basically no illegal immigration, and so that was the single most effective issue that he campaigned on, and the single most effective Republican campaign issue. So this does pose a challenge for Republicans in that they can't campaign against that. They have to campaign on, we have solved this problem, and do you want to go back to the way it was?
Well, look, that's an interesting point. It is sort of like the Republicans wanting to be the national security party after winning the Cold War.
Exactly.
Right? So if you actually do come in and solve a problem, you don't get credit. I mean, you do get credit. It's not true. You do get credit if Democrats keep saying they hate ICE, and they ICE is evil, and ICE is a government agency with employees who are risking, people who work for ICE are law enforcement officers who are risking their lives doing things, and you talk about them like they're Nazi brown shirts. Like, that's something that I think you're going to be making a mistake with. However, then there's the other way of looking at it, which is don't attack ICE, because ICE is, people, and they're American people who are doing this for America. And on the other hand, do we really like these raids? People are very made uncomfortable by these. A lot of people seem to be made uncomfortable by these raids who aren't just, lunatic left-wing activists. It's a lot of government action. And a lot of behavior that is not a usual sight. This kind of like semi-military law enforcement in the middle of cities and that sort of thing. So it's very vague how much credit or blame he'll get for stuff like this. But let's talk about healthcare also for a minute. So look, this is the problem with Republicans and Democrats and the things that Democrats want to do. Democrats say, here, we'll give you money. Then Republicans come in and they're put in the position of having to say, we're going to stop giving you money. That's why it's such a fiendishly effective tactic to want to use the government to give people money, because then you either have to stop it, and then they're like, wait, what happened to the money you were giving me? Now everything that I'm doing in healthcare is more expensive. You're like, well, we shouldn't have done it in the first place, and it's not right, and it's distortive, and we can't afford it, and all that. And it's like, well, I don't know. I had it last year, and this year I don't have it, and now my bills are going up, and it's your fault. And that's the problem, is it will be their fault. And if I were a Republican in the House or the Senate, I would be terrified, because if you do anything that looks bad, Trump is going to screw you. Trump is going to say, I never said that they should eliminate all that money. I said
he wants to send out checks.
Yeah, I'll send out checks. We'll give it to you in the form of health savings accounts. Like, I still want to give you money. It's these guys over here who, do whatever I want them to for the most part, and then they need to do something principled, and then I'm going to cut the rug out from under them. So if you are a person in the House or the Senate who wants to take a lead in this, you are like looking at Democrats calling you a monster and Trump cutting your knees out from under you. Is there any, I don't know. So I just think I don't feel for them. They chose this. No one told them to run for office, So suffer the consequences of having decided you want political power in the United States.
I think we should add, there's something else I think that's draining Trump here, and his sense of mastery of events, which is this long, losing, and unprincipled pursuit of Vladimir Putin and trying to get a peace deal in Russia. I say unprincipled not because it's unprincipled to want to stop a war, but because of the terms Trump is trying to impose and the enemy he seems unable to stop making of Zelensky.
The thing that I was horrified by this week in terms of was Trump's public case that Biden gave Zelensky money and Zelensky took the money and then lost 25% of Ukraine's territory, which is really a shocking, fake history that he's telling. The major loss of territory to Russia happened during the Obama administration in 2014, not during the Biden administration in 2023 or 2024. And Zelensky was performing on sitcoms on television when all of that happened. And he's trying to create the conditions under which people in the United States will say Zelensky stole our money and then lost territory anyway. And that's just defamatory. You can like or not like Zelensky. I don't really understand why people would dislike Zelensky. Also, by the way, all the people, decrying the corruption in Ukraine and how terrible the corruption in Ukraine is. I mean, wars involve the expenditure of money by governments at a very, very high and unprecedented level, and every war features people stealing money from governmental coffers. Like, not to liken everything, but there were famous commissions in the United States, the Wade Commission, which discovered that half the budget of the Union and the Civil War was stolen by quartermasters in the Union Army. And then Harry Truman became vice president because he chaired a commission on military theft, theft of dollars from the World War II military effort. So it's the nature of
in Ukraine they
I,
have to,
I think it's all disingenuous. They just
Well, I mean, what the hell do they think happens in Russia? For God's sakes!
I know, right?
Exactly. But in Ukraine, they had to sort of tear down any regulatory walls to get that incredible drone effort going, and other technological advances. But also, I think there's just the fact here that aside from the unprincipled part of it, it's been almost a year of Trump saying we're very, very close. Putin's close. We had a really good talk, and then getting shot down. And that simply that's not a winning posture.
Right. Yeah. I want to shift gears wildly and surprisingly bring up an article in the New Yorker by Rachel Aviv about the neurologist, essayist, sage, sort of lionized figure in the world of late 20th century, early 21st century America, Oliver Sacks, whose, I think, most famous book was called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The guy who wrote these stories about people with neurological illnesses and diseases and conditions that he treated, and what those unusual stories that they went through in their lives and their life experience tells us about being human, and what it means to be human, and what it means to how perception works, and what humanity is, and what empathy is, and how everything works. And this extraordinary article, which is very confusing and very long, and basically talks about two different aspects of Sacks's character, one of which is his tortured relationship to his own homosexuality and the half century that he experienced in treatment with a psychiatrist that he loved, who seemed to have done very little to actually help him, but with whom he was deeply obsessed. That part of his story. And then the other part of his story, which is, and this is really the meat, that all the stuff that made him world famous, he made up a lot of it. Just like totally invented, and says so in his diaries. Rachel Aviv got access to his diaries and private papers. And he said as he was getting famous, he basically was terrified that he would be exposed, that people would learn that he was fictionalizing details from these case histories that he was writing about. And a lot of the stuff that he fictionalized is weirdly sexualized material about whether or not people like this. The famous case that became the movie Awakenings with Robert De Niro and Robin Williams about people who are in this kind of state of deep paralysis, frozenness, who were treated with the drug L-Dopa and then sort of came to after decades of somnolence. And the movie is all heartening and loving about how wonderful it is that they've come out of this. And the book is much more about how one of these guys, Leonard, the central character, basically becomes like a sexual maniac and deviant, stuff like that, or what I would call a deviant. And that some of that was true, some of it wasn't true. He made up a lot of it. because he wanted to push a line about sexuality. It's very unclear. Anyway, that's this piece. You should read it. It's really a remarkable exploration of a literary man's reputation. But I do think it's very important in a world in which we constantly talk about how the media are untrustworthy, that we spend very little time on how the highest peaks of media celebrity and fame at the most profound levels also feature people who make shit up all the time.
John,
all the time.
My impression, was I wrong in reading this, which it is fascinating, but I think we were talking before this and I said, she kind of buried the lead. Like, you do take away, he's obviously making this stuff up, but that's not, you got to get into the piece to kind of understand what like, it doesn't lead with that. So definitely read, is that he's putting autobiographical stuff into what he presented as case studies of patients, right?
Yes.
So
his own favorite quotes
right.
from
When you're
from Wilke and stuff like that.
Sachs is credited with originating, inventing the patient case study. But if you go back and read his case studies, we now find out through this article that there are just tidbits of his own life and his own experiences and his own favorite things, whatever, his own psychodramas in a bunch of these case studies. They're not at all about the patients. And that's like the scandal here.
Well, I wanted to go to so those case studies that you talk about, right?
And the Leonard is one of them.
Right. They follow in the tradition dating back to Freud of psychoanalytic literature, which are based on Freud. The work that made Freud's reputation were case studies. The Wolfman, Dora, the sexual hysteric. I mean, these sort of famous accounts that he would provide of patients that he met, all of whom were suffering from neuroses that were based on childhood experiences or fantasies that they believed or didn't believe, and all of that. And Abe, last night you said when we were texting back and forth, you're like, probably Freud made that stuff up too.
I've always felt that, yeah, because the kind of maladies he talks about, we don't see. I mean, hysterical blindness,
right? Yeah,
I mean, it makes for really fascinating writing. So I think there's a really long tradition of this, and we also see it. We saw it a few years ago in like social science writers, popular social science writers.
Yeah, Jonah Lehrer.
Right. Yeah. There's this. I think because they're not dealing in hard science, there's a lot of room to inject things into it, and especially if you want to use the field, the social sciences, to say something larger and interesting about the world and experience, you've got to sort of massage things into shape to create a solid narrative out of, I think, pretty thin evidence. And right. I think we see that over and over in this particular field, and people eat it up, by the way, because it's because you're on this edge of very fascinating material. It's like, it has to do with experience, and then the mysteries of how the mind works, and the mysteries of human relations, and people love to believe it. So the audience is always very willing to go along with it.
Right. Well, and if you take the New Yorker has turned 100. There is a documentary on Netflix called The New Yorker at 100 that people are telling me to watch. That I've never been.
I started it.
No, thanks.
I couldn't get through.
I've never been part of the cult of The New Yorker.
Self-congratulations.
No, thank you.
Yeah, right. Okay, but here's the thing. So The New Yorker invented the field of what you might call literary nonfiction or creative nonfiction. These long impressionistic essays by writers who wandered around and told stories about race. There was A.J. Liebling, who wrote about sports, wrote a book about Huey Long, wrote about food in France. And of course, the sort of legendary Joseph Mitchell, who was a courtly Southern gentleman who wandered around New York telling stories about demi-mondaine figures and bars and scragglers, and then had the world's worst case of writer's block and spent 30 years coming into the office every day and never producing another article. And basically, we now know that Liebling and Mitchell made stuff up, made a lot of the stuff up that they claimed. And then, like, the most famous article in New Yorker history, which was John Hersey's account of going to Hiroshima a year after the bombing of Hiroshima, which took up an entire issue of the New Yorker, and is a kind of legendary feat of magazine publishing. We have no way on earth of knowing whether or not any of the tales that he tells in that account are factually accurate. I mean, they might as well be. I'm sure the horror stories are the horror stories. These are people who were living on the side of an atomic bomb strike. I'm sure that things were horrible beyond belief. But the New Yorker has about it this patina of, they have so many fact checkers, and they were fact checking, the vaunted New Yorker fact checking machine. And yet their main contribution to nonfiction was creating this weird category of writing in which people were making claims about the accounts and lives of people that were unverifiable by definition, and that 30 years after the fact, somebody goes and starts digging around, and it turns out that the stories were made up. So what does that what does that tell us about the way nonfiction developed in the United States from 1925, when the New Yorker came into existence, till 2025, when the New Yorker is now debunking things that appeared in the New Yorker? And what this means about what you should do when it's literally what reporters have always said, which is, what is it? Is if your mother tells you something, you better check it out. When something sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. If a quote is too apposite, somebody may have goosed it a little bit or made it up entirely.
This is not entirely the point you're making, John, but, I was a subscriber to the New Yorker 20 years ago and thought it was a great magazine. I think over the past 5 to 10 years, it's been driven into the ground largely under the editorship of David Remnick. I think it's a much less relevant and great publication than it once was. And I think the cherry on top of that was the Pulitzer Prize award to the New Yorker for commentary for its poet, Mossab Abu Toha, of the Palestinian poet who has made a career accusing Israel of genocide, and whose social media posts savaged mainstream media outlets for, quote, humanizing Israeli hostages. And that to me was, an embodiment of much of what the publication has become. And of course, the New Yorker had to nominate and approve of, his application to the Pulitzer.
Right. I mean, there are so many such cases in the New Yorker's, history.
I don't know where the fact checkers were on his commentary, but
yeah, right,
somewhere else.
I mean, E.B. White advancing the interests of one world government, Jonathan Schell trying to create the nuclear freeze movement. Time and time again, the New Yorker has been guilty of using nonfiction as a form of advocacy with the patina of, factual, absolute factual perfection. But this thing that Abe mentioned, the world of the behavioral, psychological, sociological anecdote, which is by definition anti-science because it involves things that are irreproducible, right? That if you're going to claim that people do X, Y, or Z, you need to study it. You need to have a sufficient number of people who do the same thing. They need to do the same thing and have it recorded over time. And then that result needs to be reproducible by another scientist who can make sure that the claim that 50% of people who do X when they're 5 years old end up molesting their own children.
I'll give you an example. Like it happens on a small scale all the time. I'll come across these articles. It's not necessarily in the New Yorker. This is all over the place. Some sort of social science article. It'll start with some type of counterintuitive claim, like, turns out being lazy is good for you, something like that. And then the second I see that, I go, I know this is made up. I absolutely know this is made up. And you could spot these, made up or massaged or, whatever, cherry picked. You can spot these every day. It's a kind of game.
Look, this is a problem in hard sciences, where it turns out that people, scientists who are needing to get more grant money or do whatever, fiddle around with their results. Study things have to be withdrawn. We just went through a 5-year period in which the world was thrown into turmoil and chaos by people using the patina of hard science to say that it was okay for the Centers for Disease Control to suspend rent increases nationwide, things like that. So, having skepticism is now a rational defensive weapon. And something like this is just exhibit number 200,000 in be skeptical when an expert tells you something. But this is sort of bigger because Sachs became a kind of sage, like a kind of saintly figure who brought a new form of empathy to describing what happens to people who suffer from injuries to their brains and how we need to understand them and have empathy for them. And as Eliana says, he was largely writing about himself, probably, or taking these people and then making autobiographical points about his own suffering or applying things that he thought to them that they were not, that had nothing to do with them. And it's weird when stuff like this it's like discovering that, a saint, it's like discovering that the woman who won the New York Marathon 40 years ago took the subway to win the New York Marathon. It's like she gets garlanded, she gets the medal, and then like 24, someone's like, I never saw her between mileposts 6 and 22. She gets on the subway. Rosie Ruiz was her name. But anyway, I don't know. I just, it's important to maintain that attitude of skepticism. Like,
the thing is,
say, toward Ilhan Omar's history of her marriages. Because the Free Beacon is back with more on the Ilhan Omar marrying her brother story.
Well, I have to say, we don't have more on the Ilhan Omar marrying her brother story. This has all been out there. However, we're revisiting the story because the massive Somali fraud, mostly Somali fraud, grabbing national headlines has put Ilhan Omar also in the middle of this story because her district is at the heart of this. She took a video of herself at the restaurant that was at the heart of much of this fraud. And as a result, President Trump has been mentioning this. And so he's been at rallies talking about the fact that Congresswoman Omar came into this country. All she does is complain. And he's right on the money. And so he said, and she married her brother. He's at a rally in Pennsylvania on Tuesday and says, and she married her brother to get into this country. Can you imagine if Donald Trump married his sister? How long do you think it would take for them to come after me? 2 hours or less than that? And he said, my sister, she's a beautiful person, but can you even imagine? And so my dad actually was the original reporter on this story dating back to 2016. And so Trump is right. He's correct. The crux of the story is correct. She did marry her brother. She did not marry her brother in order to gain entry to the country. And so I thought, setting the record straight on precisely what happened and why would be useful as the president is seizing on this. And I would say, we still don't know why she did it exactly. But what's important for people to understand, you can go look through all the social media posts of these folks calling each other brother and sister and referring to their father, their mutual father, as their father. On the marriage certificate, which we published at the Beacon, Omar puts her last name as Elmi and then crosses it out and puts Omar, and Elmi is their shared last name. Somali sources say that the reason Omar's last name is Omar is that she actually came in as a child. I mean, this part is not her fault. She came into the United States as a fraudulent member of the Omar family, which I think the State Department has said that in the 90s, when Somalis were gaining asylum to the country, the citizen relationships were like the folks claiming familial relations, there was huge fraud in that. So this is not at all surprising. So Omar, my understanding is not her real last name. Meanwhile, a few of her siblings got asylum in the UK. So these guys were separated, and then she married her brother to get him citizenship and bring him over to the country in 2009. So you can go read about it all at the Beacon. Trump is very much on this, but getting the facts a little bit wrong. So if you really want to understand what happened, and I think my dad says in the piece that this does prove there's a new form of political scandal under the sun.
Right. What's important and maddening about this is that liberals who hear this, they think we're like in Candace Owen land when we discuss this. Yeah. They think this is wild, conspiratorial, right-wing craziness.
And she was married to two people at the same time. It wasn't even that she just married her brother. And then filed fraudulent tax returns. I mean, it's totally crazy. And to your point, Abe, when this happened, or, a few years after this happened, I was still at Politico, and I'm keeping my head down about it because I know where I am and who I work for. I'm not saying a word. And I was about to leave to go work at the Free Beacon, but an editor yelled to me across the newsroom, "Hey, Aliana, do you know your dad is peddling this, Ilhan Omar married her brother conspiracy just wide across the newsroom?" And so, if someone's going to come after my dad, I wasn't going to bring it up and suggest Politico write a story on it, but they yelled across the newsroom. So I turned around and said, yeah, I know what my dad's writing about. And actually, he's right. Do you know, I wonder why Politico isn't covering it. Do you have a thought? Why aren't we writing a story about it? But the mainstream Minnesota press has actually covered it, and her response to anybody who writes a story about it is, "You're racist."
That wasn't Ryan Lizza, or it was Ryan Lizza?
That was not Ryan Lizza.
Oh, well. Well, there is part 5 of the Ryan Lizza Olivia Nuzzi story, which is, I believe, out behind a paywall, so you can read it. And it's now getting very Byzantine. But let me just say that Ryan Lizza keeping his powder dry this while his fiance, after his fiance cuckolded him, humiliated him, sought a restraining order against him when he didn't do anything to her, and then he just kept it quiet. He kept his head down until she popped her head up, and then he is like, the receipts that he is releasing against her. This is one of the great acts of revenge I have ever, justifiable revenge, I guess. I mean, not that I find him an admirable person in any way, shape, or form, but I certainly think that he should be enjoying his triumph. if you want to follow the world's most sordid, psychotic story,
especially contrasted with how her book tanked.
Yeah. 1,200 copies sold. I figured there would be at least a little more curiosity about this than
someone said on Twitter. You can't find more people who just want to buy a gag gift.
There you go. Well, that's, by the way, and of course Ryan Lizza fired by the New Yorker in 2017. So that, I don't know what that means, but we'll bring that full circle just for the hell of it. Okay, well, we have come to the end of another week. I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Sunday night, of course, is the lighting of the first candle of Hanukkah. I'm sure that we will get some really fun anti-Semitic content out of Tucker and Candace relating to how the Maccabees were actually, unjust enemies of the wondrous Greeks, and God knows what other nonsense they'll be peddling. And we'll be back on Monday. So for Abe and Eliana, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.